Hi, this is Ken Gosnell with CEO Experience. Welcome to our CEO conversation. And today we have the pleasure of having Mike Mercurio. Mike is a partner with the law firm of Offit Kurman. Mike is a personal friend and has areas of expertise in market acquisition, mergers, and of course, expanding our businesses through acquiring other companies and organizations. So I thought Mike would be a great addition to our CEO conversation today as we talk about what's next in the marketplace. And so, Mike, welcome.
And we don't know none of that yet.
Thank you for, I'm sorry, hey, Mike, thank you for joining us today. Hey, listen, one of the reasons I wanted to invite you to come on for our time together was I know that you help businesses in all different pathways along the business process. And obviously the last few weeks and last month or so has been very, very difficult. I know your firm has put together some special resources related to the COVID-19 issue, but what are you encouraging business owners at this moment? What are you saying to them when they call you up?
Well, again, thank you for having me. Like all businesses, law firms are not immune to this scenario, and we too are impacted by this crisis, and it's tough on all of us. Many business owners, I'm getting calls really in two buckets, if you will. As you might imagine, we're getting a lot of calls on crisis topics. So first and foremost, really centers around employment issues. So in that regard, when this first hit, there were many questions around, should I furlough employees? Should I terminate employees? What does that mean for unemployment and what have you? And sort of an offshoot of that, what we've been specifically telling employers or people in businesses is that you need to have a COVID-19 policy. It's not good enough. I presume all business owners have a certain employment policies in place, handbooks, maybe employment agreements, but you really have to have a COVID-19 policy in place, really in two regards. One, because these circumstances are special and they're not something we've seen before. I don't think anyone's seen this scenario, period. And so your employment policies aren't going to necessarily address this type of scenario. Because I'm running into clients that are, they have employees that are saying, listen, we're essential, but my employees don't want to go to work because they're fearful. What do I do? If you don't have a policy to handle this, you could run into litigation down the road. You should have a telecommuting policy. We're all going virtual now. We're talking on the Zoom call in the virtual environment. And, it brings up special considerations when people are working remotely, and you should have a policy. Many employers don't have those types of policies. Specific to the CARES and PPP, my firm does have a resource guide that I can circulate to you, Ken. You can send out to this group that has details about the various programs and opportunities. And while I'm not an expert on CARES or PPP, I do have colleagues that are in the employment group, and we've been handling calls every day, all day long, answering questions about, the PPP program, how it intersects with, for example, 3610 in government contracting. It's evolving. Nobody knows. I think when we started here, someone said, well, nobody really knows. And that's the truth. Nobody really knows where this is going. So every day it changes as we get more guidance out from Congress and the states and the various, even the local banks. They were inundated with these applications, as probably all of you guys know, you all own businesses, when you're trying to apply for these programs. Every day there's new regulations coming out. Every day we're providing updates. And so I'll send that to you, Ken.
Yeah, I thought that was a great resource that you guys provided, and very impressive, of course, which is everything that you guys do and everything you do specifically is really, you and I've talked a lot about in the past how businesses sometimes are unprepared, and primarily from a process position or even a documentation position, just like you were talking about having a telework policy or certain policies in their handbooks to be able to address these issues. How would you encourage a business owner or a business at this point to go about thinking through some of those policies, especially because I think now, especially in this downturn and maybe this time off, it's a great time to go back and look at policies of your company and processes, and obviously, hopefully, we won't have another pandemic, but what do I need to do? How do I need to shore that up? So how would you encourage them to go about that, to review those
Well,
processes and implement them?
I mean, not to be self-serving, but I would say you talk to your attorney. Um, Employment, as all of us probably know, is highly regulated. Okay, it's not an area that you really want to Google and get, LegalZoom handbook. From an employer's perspective, sometimes having a handbook that's not properly crafted, for example, or an employment agreement or policy is worse, puts an employer in a worse position than it would be in had it not had the policy. It's an area that's filled with mines and traps. So take an example. I have a key employee, and with a lot of key employees, we have restrictive covenants with these folks, meaning on one hand, confidentiality and no solicit clauses, but on the other hand, maybe non-competes. This intersects with your policy. So, for example, if you have an employment handbook that was a generic one, and you didn't really realize what was in it, and you had made a promise that you would do this or do that, if you didn't do such thing, an employee could use that as a leverage model to break the covenant. So I would say that the most important thing to do, and again, not to be self-serving, and I'm not an employment attorney, so it's not necessarily for me. I'm a corporate attorney. Although we have employment attorneys, you got to have these things carefully crafted. But to your point about this being a special time, this is a time to really firm up your relationships with your employees. I mean, culture is a time. Now's the time when our employees are remote and not necessarily down the hall. This is a time for us as business owners to find new ways to make our businesses that much desirable to our employees, to really go the extra distance, whatever it may be. We're finding that it's opening up a new marketplace frankly, for hiring. Now maybe it's not on folks' mind. Hiring may not be on their mind immediately because of the crisis, but a lot of good folks are being laid off. So the pool of talented people is potentially larger now. So you may have the opportunity of getting or finding that key salesperson if you're looking for one, or that key manager. Also, what this marketplace is teaching us is that we can telecommute more than maybe we all thought. And that means your talent pool doesn't necessarily mean they have to live in the zip code that your business is located. It could mean that you could have a business development person or whatever type of role who lives across the country who can still actively participate in your business effectively. So it's opening up new doors for folks. But I would be very careful about writing employment policies, especially around COVID-19. It's very, very new, and I think it's full of pitfalls. And we are not that we relish this, but we foresee a lot of litigation coming out of this. And
I do too.
that's an unfortunate sidebar to this scenario, is when people are let go and they feel like they weren't treated correctly or otherwise not treated well, litigation ensues.
Yeah. I'm actually thinking about litigation. I'm thinking about suing China myself. So that's just a joke. But you're right.
Yeah, that's a terrible scenario we're going in.
It is. Hey, real quick, I'm just finishing that thought, and then I do want to, talk about some other aspects of preparing our business. Is there certain language or certain, I guess, even because this COVID-19 thing is so new, it's just, I'm curious as well. I mean, what kind of language should even be in a policy is related to that? Is it related to kind of pandemics or natural disaster type of situations, or is it just?
No, like if you take like say teleworking or telework policy, you want to talk about things that you would naturally think about when we're even on a call like this. You want to think about use of your technology. So if you've issued laptops to your employees or other devices, use of the technology, how it's used, what it can be used for. Security. Like, for example, I mean, we're on Zoom, which is ironic because my firm blocked Zoom, and I'm not using my firm computer because my firm believes Zoom has some problems. Neither here nor there, right? But how you use your company computer and when you use it and what you access. For example, my firm's got a very specific policy about what an employee can access on the internet and what they can't access on the internet. and when they can access things and those items. And if you don't have that stuff spelt out, you as an employer are behind the eight ball, so to speak. There are some other areas though that I just wanted to reference that you might want to consider that go beyond employment that we're also seeing in this crisis. So for example, we're seeing a lot of lease considerations. If you're a commercial landlord or you're a tenant, probably a lot of folks are tenants and they have space. What do you do with your lease? We're seeing a lot of lease abatement requests and amendments. And I would say that if you're abating or otherwise not paying rent for a period of time, that the obvious thing is to make sure you get in writing, but make sure that it properly memorializes the terms that are recited in the lease. So for example, if the landlord's allowing you to abate for a period of time, make sure the proper parties are signing on to the amendment, because these are lease documents can be some of the most complicated documents that we might sign as business owners. As commercial leases, as you've probably all seen, are very, very complicated, and they're also fraught with landmines. So make sure if you're amending your lease, which is a period of time where maybe you're not paying rent or there's some sort of abatement, that it's amended properly, citing the right, referencing the right pieces to your lease and provisions and so forth. We're also seeing questions around contracts. So things such as does force majeure clauses apply in contract discussions, because clearly perhaps some people want to break contracts or people want to delay contracts. And really the answer is you got to check, but the default assumption is that it doesn't apply, that virus and pandemics aren't necessarily acts of God, at least in the legal scenario, and it may not give you rights. That's not to say you shouldn't look at it. We're also getting questions around insurance, business interruption insurance. Does again, a virus like this or pandemic, how does business interruption or other insurances apply? And I'd say, again, you got to take a really careful look at your policy. And the insurance industry was smart, I think, a few years back when there was SARS and things like that hit. Smart, I guess, to protect the industry, not so great for the end user, because a lot of those policies now have exceptions for virus and pandemics and things like that. So you can't get insurance. This is like a perfect scenario where you think, oh, I got a business interruption. It may not be because you can't work. It may be because the supply chain is interrupted. It may be because of some other scenario that is an indirect effect from this virus, but you may not be able to get insurance, or at least use your insurance that you thought you had. So again, look at these things. We have a whole insurance group that's looking through these policies for folks, but it comes down to the legal provisions in each agreement. But those are questions we're getting as well. We're also getting a lot of questions around, and I would tell people from a proactive point of view, and we're in the same boat as everybody else, collections and receivables, your financial side of the health of your business is really important during these times. One, to confirm invoices so there's no confusion, and two, to really be proactive. We're getting letters from vendors and so forth that just basically say, hey, we're not going to pay you. And you guys may have seen those types of letters too. They're just kind of like letters that we're not going to pay, or our new policy is now 90 days payment, even though our contract says 30 days payment. If you get those types of letters from vendors or suppliers, you need to reply, either saying it's okay or it's not okay, because it could be construed as a change in terms to your agreement. So an innocuous letter saying, hey, we're not going to pay you now, or we're going to pay you in a delayed fashion, maybe if you don't respond or otherwise refute it, may be viewed as a change to your contract, and that would maybe as someone that's owed the money may not be something you want. Right. So be careful there as well.
Yeah, that's helpful. I appreciate that insight. You and I've talked about. I mean, one of the things that I appreciate about your work is you really help businesses think about mergers and acquisitions. And sometimes, and we know as we think about, I'm going to pivot to think about acquiring businesses, but sometimes I know business owners that get acquired. At times a bigger company might come in and find a smaller business, and that business owner isn't thinking about selling. They're not even really, that's not even on their radar. It just kind of happens organically. And yet sometimes business owners are unprepared for that. So what is it from a documentation standpoint? What do you feel like, just to if you would say on a base level, what businesses really need to have in order to be, really fully functioning business, what do you find businesses or business leaders are mostly unprepared for?
Well, I would say there's a couple pieces, a couple components to this, and you alluded to it. One is there's a concept around time and timing. And I always look at it in terms of internal timing and external timing. And I find a lot of business owners really focus on internal timing. And by that, I mean, I'm working my business and I want to sell it in 3 years. And or I want to retire at 65 or whatever it may be, your internal clock as to when I want to be out of the business. And that's an important factor that goes into the situation. But there's the external timing as well. And the external timing, by that I mean is, well, look at the situation we're in from a marketplace perspective. So, I may have said 3 years ago, I want to sell my business in 3 years, which would fall to today. But today would be a terrible time to go to the market, correct? I mean, you wouldn't want to go to the market today because one, there probably are likely few buyers for your business. And two, you're not likely to get a great valuation for your business. And three, you probably get terrible terms if you could find someone to buy your business. So the balance between internal timing and external timing is really, really important. And I find that a lot of business owners miss out on that aspect. And it becomes very, very critical because just think back a few months ago, and I don't know how many of you follow the markets, but the markets were booming. It was a great time to sell your business, and the valuations were at peak levels, and it was across industries. We're all hoping it'll pick back up, but it was across industries, across geographies, and it would have been a great time. So I caution people to be really mindful about the external. And you said it, Ken, I think you said sometimes, you didn't say it quite this way, but I think that's what you're getting at. Sometimes deals come when you're not expecting it. So, I want to retire at 65, but it's 63. Someone comes to me and offers me about what I'm looking for. Do I take it? Well, if I don't take it, then I have to have to know that the market's going cycles. Maybe we're going to go in a down market, and I might not be able to then get to a place where I can sell for this value again till when I'm age 68. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe it's another 5-year cycle. But do you want to go through all of this pain per se, and the uncertainty of maybe I'll lose my business, how my business may not increase in value? And that's another thing that, when I'm talking about time with business owners, I think folks put too much emphasis on the notion that time being a multiplier of business value. In other words, in 2 years, my business will be worth X plus 2. It could be, or X plus 5, but it might be X minus 2 or X minus 5. So time's not always a multiplier of value. It may be if your industry is growing and the market's good. But now, there may be businesses, I don't know specifics, but there could be businesses that are suffering. I know the businesses that are suffering, but that were worth, X. But when we finish this crisis, they may have to have shrunk, and now they're X minus something. And that, that's how time changes things, and that's how we're not fully in control of our businesses. But in terms of your question about documentation or what people should have, I would say that one of the things I found is that many business owners are not prepared to sell from let's just say from a legal perspective, because what you do to operate your business and get your business to the point of sale is vastly different from selling your business. And it's not something that anybody would necessarily be at fault for or would know they're even not ready, because it's not how you would operate your business. Because when you're operating your business, you're doing it in a schematic, theoretically, of looking for growth, and you're being very entrepreneurial. But when you're selling your business, you change your mindset changes a bit. And I find that most times the things that are valuable when you're operating your business are not as valuable when you're selling your business. So for that, I mean, many clients, I find, just take one area of is corporate governance, right? Corporate governance meaning, who owns our businesses? How is it structured? What are the relationships between owners of businesses? I find that, frankly, most business owners don't give it, much thought during their business. They know, well, I'm in partnership with this person, and we have an agreement, and we're a C corp or an S corp, and I should have some bylaws, and I should have some other things. but I got to go out and catch that next client. I got to sell that next business. I got to do this, I got to do this next thing. And that's correct. When you sell your business, that documentation becomes very, very important, because a buyer is going to come in and say, listen, well, how do you own your business? Well, let me see your stock certificate. Well, I issued one 20 years ago, and I think it's in the drawer. I lost it. And then I transferred a couple shares to my son, and that's all problems for a business. So what happens many times, and this is sometimes while costs go up in M&A, I end up doing multiple transactions when I'm selling a business. I sell the business. I'm also cleaning up the business. And many times I'm restructuring the business. And, this is what we do for a living. So we're not upset by doing this. I do this. But for the business owner, it's very hectic, because they have 4 jobs then. They're running their business because they got to keep it strong, and they got to move forward in case the deal doesn't go forward. They got to sell their business in a confidential environment too, mind you. They got to clean up their business, meaning they got to go back and recreate all the documentation they don't have. I don't have that contract with their customer. Oh, I don't have my key salesman locked up who brings in $1 million of value every year. Buyer wants to see that. And I may have to restructure my business. I'm a C corporation. Oh, I didn't realize when I sell it, the tax scenario is terrible for me. I may want to try to restructure it. And, you may be able to do that in the midst of a transaction. You may not. Your timing you may be limited by time, but it becomes very, very tough to do all those things as a business owner.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what you just articulated is so powerful for business owners to be thinking about, because just in the selling of the business alone, that takes everything that a business owner has. And it's so hard and complicated to go back and try to clean things up or restructure it and continue to run the business. So, man, that's fantastic.
Well, Ken, can I add to that as well? You're doing that in a transaction in the light of day. So in other words, when you're cleaning up and documenting, you're doing this with the buyer watching you,
right?
Because when you're doing this now, your disclosure and openness and transparency is your friend in a transaction, because the buyer's got to see this. You can't like, oh shoot, I don't have my person locked up, or I don't have this contract locked up, and it also brings up a concept around leverage. Okay. In deals, leverage, who has the leverage has the strength. Yep. So you just think of it. I'm selling my business, and I just realized I didn't lock up my key person, so that they can walk. They can just leave and take a whole bunch of business. Well, that's not good. I got to go to this person in the context of I'm selling my business and ask them to sign an agreement. Pretty please sign this agreement, because I really need you to stay on so I can sell this business to make some money. Not a great position to be in. So could be leveraged from a lot of directions. So
yeah,
that's not a great position.
Right. Hey, we're going to take some questions. I know you might have some questions for Mike, so you can put those in the chat box as well. And one of the questions, we're getting some questions in, and I've had a few even before today. Mike, I believe in the power of acquisition for growing a business. And, I think it's really critical for business owners to think about, even a small business, a couple $1 million of revenue, to be thinking about who else could they acquire or partner with to grow their business. I think it's one of the best ways for business growth. Obviously that's a sweet spot for you. You also focus on not only selling business, but helping business owners acquire businesses. Any best advice or counsel that you might give a business owner that's never acquired a business before? What should they be thinking about from a strategy perspective of how to do that?
Well, it's a great point. I think that a lot of folks, some folks I've run into, really think of mergers and acquisitions as, well, it's just those big giant companies that are doing these deals, and there's no deal for me. Acquisitions come in all shapes and sizes, and it's a great way to grow your business. And I frequently talk to clients about, I want to grow my business from X to Y. I want to go from 10 million to 20 million. Well, organic growth is one way of doing it, but as we all know, that is difficult and very time. It takes a lot of time, perhaps. So acquiring, people is a great way to, just to acquire. There's nobody in the marketplace that I can find that's a sales leader making an acquisition just to acquire people. I see a lot of acquisitions just to acquire a distinct asset class. So for example, in government contracting, people frequently just sell a contract. And that's another way to grow. I have the credentials that this company doesn't have, or they can't fully exploit their win on this contract. I would say, though, once you get beyond, or once you accept that this is a tactic that all of us can do, and there's a lot of ways to structure it. You don't have to have a lot of money. And in fact, in some business circles, you can structure deals where you're basically using the cash flow of the acquired target to pay the owner, either through some sort of earn-out or something in that regard. So there's a lot of creative ways to do it. But I would say the biggest pitfall from the acquisition side is lack of integration or lack of plan of integration. Many folks, when they're doing deals, they focus all of their energies on the upfront analysis, which is really important. Of course, you have to analyze the business and figure out what it's worth and scrub the financials and go through and figure out who you want to hire and who you want to hire and structure. But of all the deals I've done, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've only seen one deal, and we were a sell side deal, wasn't a buy side deal, where the buyer came in and during the actual acquisition had an integration plan that we started to use and accept while doing the acquisition. And that's where deals fall apart. It's not, I paid too much money. Or sometimes that, that comes in because I overpaid or I didn't get what I thought I was getting. It's a lack of integration. It's lack of thinking day plus 2 or day plus 30. What is this going to look like? How does this business unit or people fit into my overall strategic plan? And without thinking that and the why as to how I'm going to integrate, you just can't make it happen. You got to have a structure and a process to do it. And failure to do that leads a lot of deals to maybe not to be doomed, but people don't do deals to get just an even return. I mean, most people do deals because they want 1 and 1 to equal not 2, but 4, 3, 4, 5. They want a magnification of their return. Right. The lack of integration or an integration plan, things like cultural. Think about the two cultures where you're getting together. Thinking about even simple things like the technologies that you use, the benefit plans, and things like that. How these things match up. Lack of thought there or planning there can doom your acquisition to being, to falling apart at worst scenario, but also to just be so-so in a better scenario.
Yeah, boy, I love, man, what you said there is pretty powerful. One deal in 25 years had an integration plan. That is pretty, that's pretty
upfront right? That I saw. So
right.
Yeah, one. And it's because the lawyers generally stop when the deal closes, right? I mean, it's really funny, I guess, if you want to use air quotes, that we're very involved in the deal up front. We're looking at all the things and analyzing the numbers and the contracts, and we're making sure the documents are correct. And then we get to closing, and the money changes hand, and it just closed. The door closes. That's it. We're done with you lawyers. We're going and we're moving forward, and that's when the hard work starts. For at least for the business people, you got to integrate this thing and make something of it. You just paid a bunch of money. Perhaps you got to make something of it, get your return. So that's the challenge, is the lack of integration.
But I appreciate your thought on the fact that any business can be in the acquiring business, and the fact that
yes,
right, and even acquiring people or parts of a business, and even as a business owner, to be thinking not in terms of we want to sell our business, but as we think about, I use the term stewardship of our business. Stewardship connotates that I need to be ready at any point to let a portion of my business go. I was overseeing it for a period of time, but then there might be a time to let it go. And so, to be thinking about that even from our own business perspective, that there could be a piece that we're no longer called to do and we could be released to go do something else. But I like to think about every business as an acquirer. Hey,
that's a good point. Can I just add one piece to that, and which is because you raise a good point, which is if you make an acquisition and it's not working, or it's not what you thought it was, to recognize soon to let it go. And I've had clients that have bought businesses. I've had government contracting clients that have said, "Listen, I'm going to get into the commercial space and balance my industry so I can do it on both sides." And then they realize that maybe making an acquisition in the commercial sector doesn't work, or vice versa. I'm a commercial contractor and I want to get into it. Just as examples in the government space, sometimes it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Recognize it and just spin it off, so to speak. Right. That's a good point.
Hey, we've got a question, and I thought it was a good one. And if you do have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat box or send it to me directly. One of the questions was specific about the COVID-19 issue. How would you recommend, and have you heard, and I'm sure it's happening a lot, businesses that have had past employees that were no longer there filing unemployment claims now against a former employer? And will that impact their employment rates? I've heard that it's not going to, but do you know any more about that or?
It's my understanding that it does not impact, but I'm not an expert in the COVID-19 employment areas, as I'm a corporate guy, but I can get the answer to that. So if you pass along the person's contact, or I can send it back to you, Ken,
Yes,
you can I can get the answer to that question. So I'll definitely get that answer with one of my employment colleagues on COVID-19 and unemployment with respect to past employees. My understanding is it does not impact the rating, but I don't say that with full confidence because it's not my area.
right, right. And I would think have a hard time doing that. I think that's happening a lot, quite honestly, from what I've heard, and for various reasons. I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
the unemployment rate right now is at the highest point that it's ever been,
it
and
is. It is.
because everything just got shut down, and I think people are scrambling and trying to figure out what's happening. But my encouragement, as always, is sometimes I think the unemployment offices are overwhelmed as well, but they still might call you and they might ask a business owner, hey, does this person work for you, or did they work for you? And my encouragement is always to be truthful and say, here's when they worked for us, and no, they didn't work for us at this moment. But
Agreed.
that's just part of the.
Agreed. That's a good best practice. Yeah, that's a good best practice. And I think that obviously we're in the midst of this crisis, and like I said, we've been inundated with the questions around COVID-19, and we have a lot of resources there, and I'm happy to push them into your group, Ken, both written resources, but also presentations that my employment colleagues have given. But coming out of this crisis, which I guess none of us can predict, and somebody says will come out May 1st, somebody says June 1st, someone says 2022. I don't really know, and we have no control of this, obviously. But as business owners, I think we want to be prepared to come out sprinting. And I do think that from the market perspective, this crisis may, I guess, gently encourage people who are not ready to sell, or whoever, or getting close to sell, push them into the market. So from an acquirer's point of view, I guess there's really two scenarios. One is some businesses unfortunately will fail or will struggle. And if your business is capitalized and you are doing well, which I'm sure all your members are, that this is a time to grow. This is a time, keeping our business hats on, that some businesses will advance and come out of this much, much stronger. And we hope it's all of your members. So I would say for acquisitions, there'll be a lot of acquisitions targets, both from the distressed marketplace, companies that are struggling, that maybe want to merge into your business, and maybe the combination might make you both stronger. But there also may be just straight out buys where owners are going to push themselves in the market because, if I'm close to retirement, do I really want to run the risk of dealing with this again, or dealing with this in an extended fashion? I mean, it's just, everybody has a different risk profile, risk tolerance, but I think it's going to push a lot of people in the market, which will make a lot of acquisition opportunities for all of us that are out there looking to grow and still walking up that hill.
Right. Hey, one question I wanted to help you to explore the business owners just to think about a little bit is I find that a lot of times, even small businesses, they really don't understand the value that they bring into the marketplace from whether it's a technology or a process system or just a unique way of doing something that really becomes valuable. So they haven't trademarked it, they haven't copyrighted it, they haven't really gone through the process of thinking that this is a value asset to my particular business. And I think one example of this, and we changed the scenario a little bit, everybody saw on the media where Disney, the company Disney, purchased Lucasfilm's, Star Wars, and kind of the scripts of going out for the last three films, right? And if you would, the reason I use that analogy is if you think about, if George Lucas was a small business owner and he'd written those stories and they weren't the big popular, but all of a sudden somebody came in and purchased it. If he hadn't had that copyrighted, or he hadn't really owned that as an asset, no company would have purchased that. And I think that's what happens in a lot of small business, that they don't really
You're
understand
right.
the assets that they have. Can you give some information or give some insight or encouragement of,
Yeah.
encouraging business owners to think about their processes as an asset or their unique
Yes.
knowledge?
Yes. We're in business. We're in for-profit businesses, and we have lots of reasons why we're in business. But one of the reasons we're in business, I believe, is to create value. And one of the things that makes your business marketable and attractive people are the various value drivers you have in your individual businesses. And you might be surprised as to what those value drivers are. And I find, going back to where we were, just a few minutes ago, I find that when we get into M&A, a lot of times business owners don't understand those value drivers and they don't have them protected. And the time to figure this out is not when you're in the M&A process. So to use your example, the time to figure out that you do not own your process or your software is not in the M&A marketplace. And a big area, since you brought up sort of trademarks and copyrights and things of that nature, and there's many technology businesses or businesses that are creating intellectual property, intangible property, is that your intangible property many times is as valuable, if not more valuable, than your tangible property in business. And so simple things like protecting your name, your website policies. If you have something that is good, you can bet that people will lean on it and try to steal it. So we find very frequently that business owners. This goes to the notion of that these are things that aren't maybe sexy or that appealing, or maybe not what a business owner thinks is the best use of time, their time and resources when you're trying to collect, get a new client and service a customer. And, these are, but protecting your name, protecting this information you put out on the web. Your people are huge intangibles, and making sure that they're locked up and making sure that there's no um, distractions from within. So when we talk about liabilities in a business, the liabilities in very broad strokes come in from two places. One are external. Everybody always thinks of external liabilities, right? I'm going to get sued by this party. That party is going to not pay me, and therefore I'm going to have an intersection with them. But a lot of internal liabilities come up, and when you talk about process and you talk about technology and software and all those intangible things, you really got to be clear as to who owns what internally. So if you have people that are creating content for you, creating software for you, creating technology for you, you got to be really clear to say who owns this. Now, there are some default presumptions in the law. It may not be employees. It could be independent contractors that you're working with. You got to be really careful about making sure upfront that you know who owns this. So, for example, when we go back to the employment policies of where we started way back at the beginning of this conversation, a lot of times we want to have a very simple document that says that employees and contractors are signing the intellectual property that they create during the course of their engagement with us over to the company, that there's an understanding that they're creating it for us, not, and because you don't want to get into a situation where, and I've had this, where you go to sell your business and you find out you don't own what you think you own.
Right.
You just thought you owned it. You thought you owned it. You thought you had the correct license in place. You thought you had this thing protected, and you really don't. And if you don't have it documented, then it's subject to question and not a place you want to be. So you're right. There's a lot of value and a lot of value drivers that are intangible, of intangible nature. And, your reputation, we live in a world where for many of us or some of us, there's ratings and reviews and all these types of things. So reputational is very important, and that goes into your goodwill. These are things that you want to, one, acknowledge as important consideration for value in your business, and two, do everything you can to protect it.
Right. I appreciate that. We're getting some questions in. If you do have a question and you want to submit that, you can send it to me or you can put it in the chat box. We've got about 15, 20 minutes left with Mike, so you go ahead and get your questions in as quick as possible. I believe this is one of the key mistakes that a lot of business owners make, is they don't think about when people are acquiring them, or even when they go to sell their business, that they don't only just buy the value of the business, the product, if you will, but they buy a lot of the processes of that particular business. If I go in, if I purchase a business, I want to know, hey, can we continue doing what has been done in the past, or can I even improve, in my opinion, improve those processes so that we can have a better return? But every person's going to look at the key processes of a business, and they're going to value those. And especially if they're documented, if they're trademarked, if they're, that's what a franchise model in many ways has done, is they are able to document those processes and own it, which is then why they're able to replicate it. But we need to follow that kind of same model in our businesses as well.
And I would say that as an owner, what's a business that has some value? If as owners, we start our businesses. Probably we started and we were the epicenter of our business. But to get real value out of your business, you really got to make yourself, as the owner, fire yourself from your business so that the business can live on through its processes. So if I have all the information up in my head of how we do things, and I have all the customer list, that's another intangible thing that you need to make sure is protected. Customer list, customer resources. If I have it all up in my head, it's not as valuable as if I had it written down in a process, or a process that is owned by multiple people, that is replicatable by a buyer. Because more often than not, if I sell my business, I'm not continuing on. I may continue on for some transitionary period, but I'm not looking for a job when I sell my business and sell my business to have an employment role. I'm leaving. So you're going to get the most value out of your sale if your processes are committed, one, either in writing or in some other form within people that are managing these processes, so that they can continue, and that two, that they're protected. So all those things have to be protected. If they're not protected and someone can steal it or walk away with it, then it's not as valuable. And as a buyer, I'm not going to pay good money for it to walk out the door the next day, or for it just to evaporate. I can't have you leave, or the key people leave, and then I can't run the business. I just have, a myriad mix and match of some assets, but no process, no glue to run it.
Hey, Mike, we got a couple quick questions, and I know we're running short on time, but you were just talking about locking up your people to some degree, and of course, we always believe in treating people with value. But is there a best advice on how do you do that in an effective way, or that you found better than another?
Yeah, when we talk about locking up people, we want to treat people with obviously respect and care, but in business, we think that restrictive covenants are part of business, and there's a lot of confusion out there as to whether or not restrictive covenants are enforceable. They are enforceable. Even non-competes are enforceable. We enforce them all the time, but they have to be written correctly, and have to be written with thought. And that goes to where we started. Like, you just don't Google an employee handbook or employment handbook. It won't work. Likewise, you don't handwrite your employee covenants. So you start with the whole gamut of covenants. We think every employee, or at least most employees, depending on their function, should sign a very basic document that talks about confidentiality in your business. I mean, just the way you do things should be kept confidential. Non-disparagement in a business, the assignment of intellectual property, what we talked about. And then when we get to like the next tier, we talk about no solicit type covenants. So we think it's perfectly fair to ask your employees that if they leave, you can leave. It's a free country. There's no prohibition on that kind of stuff. But don't take my fellow employees or your fellow employees with you. Don't take the customers that you're working on with you. That's not fair. That's not a fair bargain. And then the last level is the true non-compete that, we use. It depends on the person, depends on the role, depends on, what they get paid, and what their level of connectivity in your business is. We find that for higher level employees, we talk about locking them up. We see a lot of creative compensation plans. So that's when we get into incentive plans like phantom equity, or performance plans, or stock options, or other types of consideration, or even real equity, true equity, or restricted equity. We see it all the time when you get employees that are really senior to the functionality of your business, and you want to incentivize them to grow your business, but incentivizing them to grow the business requires some extra compensation. And a lot of times we see that in the form of phantom equity, or some sort of equity triggered compensation plan.
Right.
So I hope that answers the question. There's a lot of different tools for this topic. It's a very good question. You do want to lock up your key employees. It is legal to do. Those documents are enforceable, but they got to be done with some thought.
And I think even more
It's
so
not
now,
one size fits all.
right. I think even as we talk about this telecommuting and telework kind of method and having, computers at home and information and, even thinking about, securing that information and how does that look like from a business perspective, but just thinking through some of those policies so that, an employee can't just walk away tomorrow and take all the data, all the information, everything that's a part of that business, I think is real important. Hey, we had another question.
Really have to think for it. Yep.
It said, what advice would you give to a CEO past retirement age that doesn't agree that it's a time to sell?
It doesn't agree it's a time to sell,
Right.
but would like to sell at some point.
Probably right. But I guess they're probably trying to
Well,
figure out that strategy, but they were looking to sell,
Well,
but now they agree.
here's one thing that this answers the question, but also I think it's good for everybody. One thing I think that a lot of business owners don't avail themselves of is use of valuations, both for their business and in the personal scenario. Okay, and by that I mean that many business owners don't really understand or fully appreciate what their business is worth. And what they need to live on, or what they really want to get out of it. I know most of us have an idea, but really, this goes to your point, Ken, about the processes and the intangibles and all that. I would say that it's really worth sitting down with a wealth planner. I mean, we don't do this kind of work, so I'm giving a free plug. A lot of these wealth planning shops will do this analysis pro bono for free. They don't charge for this because they're hoping to do your deal. So you do it in two points, and it's really powerful. One is find out what your business is worth and find out what the value drivers are. Really find out what those things are, and seek to protect them and seek to maximize them. So if you find out that your business, these are the value drivers, it's the process, or it's the software, or it's this piece of property, if it can be maximized further, find a plan to maximize it further. If it's maximized, make sure it's protected. But find out that piece of data in terms of the valuation of your business. Okay. The second data point is to find out your personal valuation or your personal scenario, what you need to live off of. Because when you go to the market, if you don't have those two pieces of information, and very few business owners actually get those pieces of data, it leaves you at a disadvantage when negotiating with a buyer. Because a buyer's going to come and they're going to say, here, I'm going to give you $10 million for your business, and I'm going to give it to you in the form of 20% cash and 15% this and 20% an earnout. And as a seller, you have no way to really evaluate if that's a fair offer for your business. And then secondarily, can I personally meet my personal financial goals? So you might say, well, I can take 10 million, but I might be willing to take 8 million if you give it to me 75% cash, because cash in hand is better than some kind of risk down the road. If you don't have the data points, then you're at a disadvantage. So I would say to your member to do those two data points. You can get a lot of this stuff done by financial advisors, wealth planners that will do this work for free. Value your business, figure out what the data points are, the driving forward, so that when you're personally ready to sell, because you've done your personal analysis as well, you're armed with the data. You know what your business is worth, you know what the drivers are, so you can push off of a buyer. Because listen, buyers are in to make deals, okay? They're not in to make you rich, they're in to make a deal for themselves. And then secondarily, know what you need personally to live for whatever your goals are, whatever you want to get out of the business. Know precisely what it is, not a guesstimate, not I think it'd be nice to have. Know what it is, whatever your goals are. And they'll do this evaluation for, I think, mostly for free. So that's how I would approach it.
Right. And I mean, I think at this point too, I mean, my take on this, Mike, and you're the expert, so you could help. I think I'm looking at businesses a lot like I'd look at the house market at this moment. We don't really know how this has impacted businesses. I mean, we know from the revenue piece, but not from the value proposition. We don't know how it's impacted.
That's right.
So right now, I would still say to a business owner, if they were past retirement age and they wanted to sell, that go ahead, go move forward with your transaction. Your business still may be valued if it's from value.
Yeah, I think that if this continues in the short term, I think the saving grace to this, if you will, is that, listen, everybody's in this. This isn't just one business that your business is impacted or your industry is everybody's impacted. I've already heard from buyers and people in the equity markets that, they're going to look at this like a hiccup. Now, if this goes on for a year and we're all shut down, business valuations may change. But for now, I would assume that your business is impacted like everyone else's business is impact. It's a very explainable, understandable impact. It's not like you suddenly lost a big customer because you did something wrong or some other thing that you could have controlled. Nobody can control the scenario. So if we get back to work in June or July, I don't expect necessarily the markets are going to go down. I think I'm hopeful the markets are going to continue where they left off. Eventually the cycle changes, of course, but I don't think that necessarily it's going to be a terrible time to sell. And I don't think your valuations are going to necessarily sink automatically just because of this.
Right. We had a couple quick questions. Somebody made a question about the election in November. Does that impact markets and values of businesses? And should people be looking to try to sell before that or wait till after that? Or what's your recommendation?
It's a great question. And I do think that the election could impact the marketplace. I do think that, however, I don't think it's the actual physical, the election itself that will impact, meaning regardless of who gets elected, if it's the Trump administration, well, they could probably continue. You're going to see the same continuation of what we've been seeing. If it's a change in administration, of course, things could be vastly different. And, what'll happen is nobody can make changes the day they're elected. There's usually a lag. So you figure you probably get a good 6 months, maybe 9 months into the first year before changes are made. But you bet if there's a change in administration, the tax laws may be reversed or changed. Taxes could go up. The regulation could change, and therefore business, the business processes are challenging. There may be more challenges in your business. So absolutely, that if you're close to sale time, this goes back to where I was talking about time and timing, internal time and external timing. Thinking about the presidential election and watching that is really important. It's a great question. I do think, especially, now that we know who the Democratic nominee, now we kind of have a little better, but I mean, President Trump as compared to, Senator Sanders, vastly different visions of the world. And so you bet that if Senator Sanders was elected, the markets would have an impact. Very definitely. But I do still think there'll be an effect 6 to 9 months before anybody can change it, because you just got to change over all the personnel and so forth. Nothing moves fast in our government, but there will be an impact. Right. Depending on who gets elected.
And then another question we had is, which I thought was a good one. What should business owners be looking for in a good buyer? I would say, besides having money, that wasn't the question, but are there some characteristics that, right, that make a good buyer? What would your recommendations be?
Well, I would say that this is somewhat not something most sellers do, but buyers do diligence on the sellers, right? They take you apart. They look at everything. And as a seller, you really have a right to do the same. Maybe not to the same degree, but I would say you should start, if you're a seller and a buyer approaches you, hopefully you have multiple buyers approach you. It comes down to leverage, right? You should do some diligence on the buyer. Most importantly, that the fact that they can pay. Okay. You should, if it's a buyer that's a serial buyer, you should seek to talk to some of their acquisitions and look at the portfolio that they may have acquired to understand, how those transactions went. Make sure, like, in a franchise, you can always talk to the other franchisees. If you're not in a franchise environment and it's a one-off buyer, you really want to figure out if there's any reputational issues. You want to try to dig up, their record on doing deals. Buyers are there to do deals. And we always say they're not your enemies, but they're not your friend. And, there's a bit of a chess game in an M&A deal. And for sellers, it can be very challenging because, one, you've not done a deal before, and buyers may have done many, many deals. And the buyer is going to, what I would say is, drag a seller into deep water. They will tell you up front that everything's easy and smooth and, they're going to do this and do that. But I would say the biggest thing from a seller's perspective is, one, do your own diligence, but two, make sure you press the buyer in your LOI right up front to get details as to the transaction. Don't allow a buyer to be vague. Buyers want to be vague. Buyers want to keep flexibility. So make sure you you push for the terms and conditions as many as you can in the LOI. You're not writing the contract, but it's cheaper for a seller to know on day one that the deal is going to happen than day 30 when a buyer comes up with a new term that's not in the LOI and you say, now I spent 30 days or 60 days on this deal and now I have to swallow this new term, but I really want to go back. I spent a bunch on legal and a bunch on accounting. So I would say, do your diligence on a buyer. Make sure they can pay. That's the biggest. The biggest one is make sure that a buyer can fulfill their obligations to you financially. Number one, because you sell your business, most people don't give it away. Most people sell for a purchase price. It's number one thing that a seller needs to be aware of, and get details in your LOI. And most definitely have your LOI reviewed by an attorney. I think buyers will tell you that it's just a non-binding letter of intent, and it is, but it's the roadmap for the deal, and it's hard to go back on that roadmap without looking weak to change the terms later.
Right. I think that's fantastic. And Mike, I think the world of you. I think the world of your work. We got a couple comments in the chat box they put out to the public or sent it to me and said how fantastic you were in helping them specifically, that they dealt with you.
Oh, that's fine.
And
it's very nice. And I'm happy to speak to anybody, just to compare notes. I mean, not engagement or anything like that. If somebody wants to compare notes, I'm happy to compare notes with folks on market, on corporate, on M&A. And if there's any resources that's needed, I'll forward those, like that CARES guide. I'll forward it to you, Ken, and I'll get an answer to that other question on the unemployment for your person that asked it. I'll send it over to you by email and you can forward it along. But thank you for having me.
Hey, well,
I really enjoyed this discussion.
You're fantastic. And, I think the world of you personally, I'm always impressed at how responsive you are to your customers and, even just contacts that you've made into the marketplace. You genuinely care about small businesses, you care about business owners. And, even though you're in many ways a transactional business, that you do a lot of things, you do it with the relationship as a preeminent component of what you do. So I appreciate that spirit. Mike, you've been fantastic today. I've appreciated you being with us on the CEO conversation. And thank you guys for joining us. I look forward to seeing you in the next conversation. Have a good week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.